Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, I rise to provide my right reply 2019-2020 national budget. I know it's a bit late in the day, it's been a fairly long day, so I'll be very brief. However, because also, Mr. Speaker, sir, there's not much to respond to, because the contribution by the opposition has been to be very polite, very pedestrian. I hope, Mr. Speaker, sir, that I would also be given enough time as I gave up my right to speak at the second reading. Mr. Speaker, listening to the opposition response in the budget, there was misrepresentation of facts, inaccuracies, contradictions, deliberate manipulations, personalization of issues, attempted character assassination, and cheap, but obviously impotent political shots. There's nothing of value to say on the budget. However, Mr. Speaker, sir, this is what we have come to expect from the opposition, with SODALPA and NFP combined, reminiscent of the past 5 years. There are no new ideas, no plausible alternatives, nothing constructive to take Fiji forward. Just the same old rhetoric, insidious and blatant bigotry, ethnic reference and hypocrisy, led by an opposition leader that brought Fiji to its knees, to the verge of economic chaos and disaster that Fijians are still paying for today. Mr. Speaker, sir, the level of contributions coming from the opposition makes us wonder if they even have the ability to even design a budget. Mr. Speaker, sir, the honourable members has never offered a proper alternative budget, even though the Honourable Prasad, even though he claimed this at the 11th hour after members of government have been demanding for this for the past 2 days. It's no surprise, Mr. Speaker, sir, why they were rejected at the polls in 2014 and 2018. Not once, Mr. Speaker, sir, but twice rejected by the Fijian people. When the results of the 2018 election results came out, I saw this as a great opportunity, Mr. Speaker, sir. I saw the glass half full. I remarked to many that those who were elected in the opposition, including the new ones, would be once and for all revealed to the public. They would be revealed for their lack of intellectual vigor and indeed intellectual rigor, their lack of candor, because you have the same old ideas, their lack of candor, inability to be a viable alternative government, inability, Mr. Speaker, sir, to treat all Fijians equally, the inability to understand the fundamental needs of everyday Fijians. Mr. Speaker, this contribution to this budget debate is the start of the demise. Mr. Speaker, sir, when I walked in Parliament yesterday, and I did not notice, the Honourable Prime Minister drew to my attention the boom washing powder packets. I thought that SODALPA was doing product placement to promote superb distributors, or the importers of this detergent, to raise funds for the campaign for the next general election. Little did I know, Mr. Speaker, sir, that they were so obsessed with this passing phrase, Beni Marama boom, that all they could do was focus on it, and the detergent box rather than focus on the budget and its details. But thanks to the unfounded reaction, Mr. Speaker, sir, to a passing phrase, Beni Marama boom will now be forever etched in the minds of our people. Mr. Speaker, and of course Fijians can now compare for themselves the Rambuka doom, or Honourable Rambuka doom now, with the Beni Marama boom. The doom of the NBF, the doom he brought about right here in this parliamentary chambers, the doom he brought about right here in this parliamentary chambers the 14th of May 1987, that forever changed the course of Fiji's history. The doom he created in the lives of many Fijians who fled Fiji after the 87 coup, as the coup was predicated on ethnicity. The subsequent doom and rape of common and equal citizenry and emigration will be indelibly etched in the minds and memories of many. And yet again, Mr. Speaker, sir, he insists that not everyone should be called a Fijian. He said this openly in Parliament yesterday, and of course, he's not the changed man he claims to be. It has a connection with the budget. Mr. Speaker, sir, let me respond to some of the contributions from the opposition. Mr. Speaker, sir, the Leader of Opposition claimed that the Beni Marama government did not face any major crisis or disaster. How absurd, Mr. Speaker, sir. We suffered the consequences of the global financial crisis in 2007 to 2009, where international banks collapsed all over the world. And yet he claimed that the GFC was during the Garcia government's time. We had T.C. Winston in 2016, the second largest storm in the world at that point in time, and the biggest in the southern hemisphere to make landfall. It wiped off approximately 1/3 of the value of our GDP within a space of less than 48 hours. We had to spend $500 million in rebuild efforts, and yet the Honourable Leader of Opposition lamented that he had to build 2 bridges for $14 million during his time after cyclone. Mr. Speaker, sir, how can we trust an opposition spokesman like this, who cannot grasp basic economic and financial fundamentals, and of course in the process has been economical with the truth? Mr. Speaker, sir, Honourable Leader of Opposition incorrectly said that the debt of countries such as USA and other large economies are around 60% of GDP. He needs to get his facts right. The debt of the USA is around about 109%, sorry, of its GDP. In other words, a nominal debt of $19.9 trillion US dollars. Japan has a debt of 234% of GDP, a nominal debt of 9.1 trillion US dollars. Singapore is 109% sorry, of GDP, which is 350 billion US dollars. And Canada is 84% of GDP, their debt, which is about 1.4 trillion US dollars, Mr. Speaker, sir. The Leader of Opposition, Mr. Speaker, says misinformed this House, and so have his other members subsequently. We have reiterated so many times in this Parliament, Mr. Speaker, sir, there is a point of difference between indigenous rights, its applicability to Fiji, and the exposure of indigenous people in Fiji as opposed to indigenous people in other countries, and indeed, conversely, racism. They are two separate issues. They use this issue for their own political expediency. But more fundamental than that, Mr. Speaker, sir, is that this opposition, as demonstrated in the past 48 hours, will always develop their policies based on the consideration of ethnicity and provincialism, but not for the overall well-being of our nation and all Fijians. Mr. Speaker, sir, Honourable Prasad, in one breath, thanks the opposition members for their contribution to the budget and completely ignored the ethnic twist of the Leader of Opposition, Honourable Leader of Opposition. His voters must note this complicity. And only prior to that, Honourable Tikon Duandua stood up saying, they do not agree with Honourable Kurindrani's statement, which is actually quite blatantly racial and divisive. NFP had to do this as it was so blatant and racial, and only because they did it, because they believed it may affect their vote bank. But NFP does not realize they've already lost it. Mr. Speaker, sir, nobody ever said, Honourable Tuisawau, that FNPF was not created under the previous governments. In fact, we are on record, Mr. Speaker, sir, for saying that it was the NFP that led to the formation of the FNPF. Of course, Mr. Speaker, sir, SODELPA, SDL, SVT tried to claim it was the Alliance Party's initiative. Nobody said that television did not come during the Honourable Leader of Opposition's time. But what we are saying, Mr. Speaker, sir, that it is our innovative policies that further propelled some of these institutions that were created previously. Whilst the NFP led the creation of the FNPF, records show that FNPF was going to collapse because of the failure of the subsequent governments. The Alliance government, the Rambuka government, the SVT government, the SDL government, to rectify the rot identified by international superannuation experts and actuarials. The Bainimarama government and the Fiji First governments corrected the blatant mismanagement of the FNPF, and today has made it an international award-winning superannuation fund. Mr. Speaker, sir, nobody said that the Alliance government did not construct the Monosavu Dam in the 1970s. We didn't say they didn't. But what happened to the rights of the landowners? What environmental standards were met? What rents were they paid? How was their possessory rights affected? Did they have electricity in their homes when Suva was getting electricity? After decades, Mr. Speaker, sir, the landowners ended up going to the court to get rightful compensation. And even then, we believe, Mr. Speaker, sir, that the outcome was not fair to the landowners. Mr. Speaker, sir, we want to fix it, but they need to be cohesive before we can help them. Mr. Speaker, sir, did the Rambuka SVT government, Honourable Leader of Opposition now, and SDL governments help them? Did they acknowledge what they went through? No, on both accounts. Did they provide electricity to them? No again, Mr. Speaker. It was the Bainimarama-led government and the Fiji First government that gave electricity to the people of Metasiri, who for decades saw the wires over their villages. Mr. Speaker, sir, Honourable Leader of Opposition is absolutely correct in saying television came to Fiji when he was in government. But he did not talk about the monopoly that existed. It was only under the Bainimarama government that My TV was issued a TV license and subsequently FBC. He failed to mention that it was only under the Bainimarama and the Fiji First governments that there was a rationalization of the frequencies through an open tender process and the consequent data connectivity and accessibility through mobile broadband. The frequency rearrangement has led to the advent of digital television, launched through the wireless platform, which everybody can watch us now as we speak. Mr. Speaker, sir, in the telecommunications sector, the Bainimarama government was the government that got rid of the monopoly that Vodafone had. We opened the market, and today we have Digicel, creating competition, improving services to ordinary consumers. Under this government, the monopolistic pricing by Fintel and TFL have been and continue to be reviewed through the FCCC. Under this government, there has been an exponential growth and affordability in internet connection. We are creating a liberal and open economy, Mr. Speaker, sir, a transparent economy. Mr. Speaker, sir, they talked about state-owned enterprises, but look at the performance then and look at where it is now. AFL is now paying annual dividends of approximately $45 million a year. EFL paid out $28.5 million. We never received these types of payouts before, Mr. Speaker, sir, as dividends. Mr. Speaker, sir, they talked about cuts to civil service salary by referring to reductions in Seg 1 and Seg 2, saying there is pay cuts as a result of that. Mr. Speaker, sir, no civil servant's pay has been cut. It demonstrates the lack of understanding of basic government finances. If they came to the workshop, where the PS for Economy and her team gave a blow-by-blow description and a blow-by-blow description of each line, they would have understood and not look silly and imbecilic in this parliament. For the information, Mr. Speaker, sir, there's been fat in these segs, where vacancies have not been filled for years in some cases, where people's salaries have been plugged at the higher bands and they were not paid that amount. This is what we call sharpening of pencils, Mr. Speaker, sir. Also, if they came to the workshop, they would have understood labour rights. Honourable Lavera, unfortunately, who is not here, attempted to create a kerfuffle about it, Mr. Speaker, sir. But of course, we know his contributions are generally meaningless. Mr. Speaker, sir, they failed to mention that all civil servants got a pay rise. Valid terms and conditions, meal allowances that was almost doubled from $9 to $20 a meal, Mr. Speaker, sir. None of this was mentioned. Mr. Speaker, sir, it was interesting how Honourable Gawaka didn't mention anything about the zero duty for new hotels under SLIP. Lower duty rates of 5% and 3% for other hotel renovations, new and existing. He intentionally omitted this, Mr. Speaker, sir. As with other colleagues of his, it's what we call intellectual obfuscation or at very best dishonesty, but likes to call himself the expert in tourism. Of course, none of them mention about the reduction of tariffs on heavy machinery, trucks and buses that will assist the transportation sector, Mr. Speaker, sir. Honourable Garangere Tambua, who holds herself out to be some patron of environmental rights, did not acknowledge anything about the huge strides we are making in creating a tax-free zone in Namboro for waste management, Mr. Speaker, sir. She mentioned Free Soul. Free Soul has been prosecuted. And the matter is before the courts, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, she says our economy is in ICU. I say that her level of economics is in the incubator, Mr. Speaker, sir. Honourable Tikon Duundu's entire contribution was about one door at the hospital. Honourable Minister for Health, he just responded to that. But did he talk about the numerous hospitals and health centres being built? Did he talk about the people in Navosa, how they'll get x-rays done, how they will be able to have procedures done? They don't have to travel all the way down to Singatoga, all the way down to Mbaa, all the way down to Nandi, Mr. Speaker, sir. The interior Viti level. The number of doctors have increased, the number of nurses have increased, the salaries have increased. He did not even mention the PPP. It will now allow procedures in Fiji to take place which never was able to take place before. Mr. Speaker, sir, they mentioned inclusiveness. We have never had a government, Mr. Speaker, sir, since Independence Days that have reached out to the public, to high school, university, social media engagement for budget consultation. Never had that. They talk about inclusion, but in the same breath they do an ethnic analysis of the budget. They start talking the vernacular language that most of the people around them, a lot of them, do not understand, who do not know the language but don't even bother to translate it, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, inclusiveness is about respect. At least we on this side of Parliament have that respect. We do not exclude people by speaking in language that others do not understand. They have a good chuckle amongst themselves. They have no decency to translate it. They're in fact going against the standing orders. They have stereotyped versions of what people are and how they should act like, right from what people should dress like. Honourable Tambuya has been a victim of that. And in fact, how should people think? They like to have stereotypes, Mr. Speaker, sir. If you do not fit in the stereotypes, they call you arrogant. Sio sio, via via levu. Mr. Speaker, sir, there were the terms used. Mr. Speaker, sir, it is unfortunate, and I really say there's a lot of emotion. The Honourable Leader of Opposition brought in my father who was sitting in the gallery. He tried to compare my father with me, saying that he's an honourable MP, he's a very humble man. In other words, I'm not humble. But let me tell you one thing, Mr. Speaker, sir. That man will continue to be honourable even after he's not in Parliament. Many of these people won't be honourable once they leave Parliament, Mr. Speaker, sir. And Mr. Speaker, sir, let me tell you one more thing about my father. Mr. Speaker, sir, let me tell you one thing. He has actually admonished me for not being severe enough on the opposition. So, Honourable Leader of Opposition, you need to know that. Gone are those days. He said, I'm too soft. He said, you should always speak the truth and be just, because you have a leader that actually allows you to do so, because we never had leaders that allowed us the liberal space to be able to talk about issues that's always been swept under the carpet. The elephant in the room was never talked about, Mr. Speaker, sir. And to challenge the unjust paradigms that have plagued our society for decades, even over a century, Mr. Speaker, sir, where truth and justice must prevail. Mr. Speaker, sir, the opposition needs to wake up. This is the new 21st century Fiji. The Constitution gives everybody the right to speak out. We have a leader that has not stopped us from speaking out the truth and breaking down stereotypes. Even if you look at the demographic range of the opposition, Mr. Speaker, sir, it tells you a huge story, Mr. Speaker, sir. We, of course, are focused on the future. Mr. Speaker, sir, the opposition, including Honourable Tambuya, Honourable Balavu, are again obsessed by funds under R, or the requisition to incur expenditure, is done for a purpose. And that is to enable new or large projects and programs to be tracked and monitored through a documentation or check and balance system process that ensures funds are spent on the purpose for which it is allocated in line with financial and procurement regulations. It is not about control by one individual, trust or cash flow of any of the nonsense claimed by the opposition, Mr. Speaker, sir. It is about best practice and good financial management. The RIE has been a feature of every budget since post-independence. Mr. Speaker, sir, in fact, if the opposition cared to ask the right question or read budget amendments, they would know that certain changes were made to the financial regulation 2017-2018 budget to increase delegation to the PS for economy under Section 9A and B of the Finance Instructions in 2010. Honourable Tambuya, you're a lawyer. Go and read it. You'll find the answer. Mr. Speaker, sir, the fact is, for all allocation under R, regardless of the total project cost or program allocation, if a disbursement or requisition application is $1 million or less, the application of RIE is approved by the Permanent Secretary for Economy, not by the Minister responsible. Only RIE applications above $1 million are approved by the Minister for Economy. These changes were made to expedite the release of funds to implementing agencies while maintaining accountability. So contrary to the hype created by the opposition, I hardly ever get to see RIE files, Mr. Speaker, sir. And of course, the protege of the Leader of Opposition was ably supported by Honourable Nengama Balavu. Mr. Speaker, sir, they don't know the difference between freebies and leg up given to citizens to help them realize the true potential by creating a level playing field. Mr. Speaker, sir, whichever way the opposition members choose to diagnose the budget, if I can call it that, Mr. Speaker, sir, the government has put in place policies that no other government has implemented before. Policies that have modernized our economy, improved the lives of ordinary Fijians, and raised our nation's international profile. Many of the opposition, Honourable Gavoka and Honourable Bulitabu, claim that this is a budget for the rich. How absurd. How absurd. Mr. Speaker, sir, the truth is, our decade of growth has ensured that every young Fijian has equal opportunity and access to education from ECE all the way through to high school. There are senior citizens, as elucidated by the Minister for Women Poverty Alleviation. There are senior citizens, most vulnerable, are provided a safety net through the pension scheme, insurance, and various social assistance programs. The decade of growth meant more jobs, more incomes, greater access to basic services, and better prospect for the future, Mr. Speaker, sir. Honourable Charlie said, I have a proclivity with Singapore because I went to school there. I know you may think that all Asians look alike, but let me tell you, Hong Kong is very different to Singapore. Mr. Speaker, sir, I want the young people of Fiji to know that this is the caliber of people who actually want to lead you. What intellectual capacity they have. The pugnacious behaviour of these people, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, let me tell you, sir, with the way that they're continuing, they'll get a huge drubbing at the next elections. It will be such a boom that they'll be blown out of oblivion. There are many positive things in the budget, Mr. Speaker, sir, what we have done and what we intend to do, Mr. Speaker, sir. In growing the SME...
Order.
Point of order, Mr. Speaker. Standing under 462(4)(a), it is out of order for a member speaking to use offensive words against Parliament or another member. So he is using pugnacious, lack of intellectual capacity, silly. He started off by using imbecilic, and stupid. To refer to other honorable members, well, you use imbecilic, these are offensive words under the standing orders. So I am asking that he withdraw those words and use parliamentary language rather than such offensive words as explained there under Standing Order 62(4)(a). These are offensive words which describe other members of Parliament. These honorable words and should not be used here. So why is referring to other Parliament members in a dishonorable and offensive and derogatory terms? Withdraw those.
No.
Honorable members, the number of name calling that's been going on during the debate on this thing, it's a give and take, and that's what you have to do, and that's been the move. Honorable member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. There are many positive things in the budget, and what we have done, Mr. Speaker, sir, is grow the SME sector, build digital connectivity, encourage point-of-sale machines and payment gateways for SMEs, and promote the overall digital agenda. Mr. Speaker, sir, Honorable Prasad used to talk a lot about the ease of doing business. Suddenly he's not talking about it at all because he knows what we've been telling them, that we have got the program that will solve this problem. In the next 18 months, this will be completely solved. He has not mentioned a word about it. It will be a transformational change, and these people will be caught up in the dinosaur age and dinosaur thinking. The opposition claimed that we introduced e-ticketing to make the rich richer. What an absurd claim. I remember reading an article, I think it was in the Fiji Times or Fiji Sun, that one of the leaders of the other parties that failed to get a seat in Parliament monitor the earnings. We know how much they earn, so we know how much they have to pay taxes. We're now able to better serve Fijians and the social welfare system. Government is able to better analyze data and collect higher revenue through taxes. Mr. Speaker, sir, they complain about e-ticketing, but these are very same people, when they go overseas, they're quite happy to use e-ticketing in countries like Australia and New Zealand. Mr. Speaker, sir, the opposition brought about the issue of 100 cents casino project. But little did they mention that this is a private project, and government didn't put a single cent in this project. In fact, we received compensation amounting to $1 million in fines from them because they did not build the casino within the timeline we had agreed. Would they have ever contemplated such an agreement? No, they wouldn't have been able to contemplate that. They talk about borrowing from the Exim Bank of Malaysia at more than 6%, when in fact the loan was at an interest rate of just above 3%. Out of the US $40 million loan contract, we utilized $19.5 million, and we did not use the balance, Mr. Speaker, sir. But there's no cost to this cancellation, Mr. Speaker, sir. So again, Honourable Leader of Opposition, you need to tell your advisors to give you the right information. Mr. Speaker, sir, the facts of the Benimara boom were very clear. Mr. Speaker, sir, no amount of parading with the boom washing powder in this Parliament will change or disapprove it. The fact is, never before, listen to this carefully please, never before has the Fijian economy grown consecutively for 10 years. Consecutively means year in, year out. Year in, year out. That's what consecutive means, Mr. Speaker, sir. This only happened under the Bainimarama government and the Fiji First government. Mr. Speaker, sir, we never saw this under the Ratumara government, the Rambuka government, the Chaudhry government, and neither during the Garase government. Of course, we know the Chaudhry government did not last for more than 1 year. Some people said they supported the cause but not the method. I think some people said that. A decade of solid growth was only delivered by the Bainimarama government. This is a feat achieved only by one government, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, the Honourable Leader of Opposition, in his response, used manipulated statistics to suit his agenda. Most of his computations of average economic growth rates were incorrect, Mr. Speaker, sir. These numbers were also regurgitated by other members of the opposition who spoke after him. They never bothered to check these numbers through official independent sources, but rely on incompetent advisors who do not seem to understand the simple difference between real and nominal GDP. Sadly, most of the opposition members blindly repeated these figures. Mr. Speaker, sir, including the former leader of opposition, Honorable Kappa, who unfortunately is not here. This is totally irresponsible and yet again another coordinated attempt at economic sabotage. The fact remains that we have doubled the size of the economy in this decade. Whether you look at the real GDP, nominal GDP, or even GDP per capita, we have doubled it. Why deny us the credit for this exemplary performance? Honorable Tikon Duandua says, and it's blatantly absurd to say, that we have inflated GDP so we can borrow more. What an absurd claim. These figures are independently compiled by the Fiji Bureau of Statistics, independently verified by institutions like the RBF, IMF, ADB, World Bank, and credit rating agencies like Moody's and Standard & Poor's. This is the same source of data that your members also use. Mr. Speaker, sir, we steered the economy through the global financial crisis. We held up economic growth even in the aftermath of T.C. Winston. But the Honourable Leader of Opposition in his statement blatantly claims the Baini Marama regime did not face any major crisis. Again false, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, the Honourable Leader of Opposition boasts that about 3.6% growth under his leadership from 1992 to 1999. But Mr. Speaker, sir, if you remove the growth rates for 1992 and 1999 because he did not serve a full term, the growth average under his leadership is only 2.3%. Mr. Speaker, sir, we've had one of the strongest periods of growth. The average growth from 2007 to 2018 is 2.7% and not 2.4%. And that's with the GFC and disasters like T.C. Winston. The average growth from 2010 to 2018 is 3.8%. The average growth from 2013 to 2018 stands at 4.5%, and a much higher 4.9% if you exclude the growth in 2016 post-T.C. Winston. This is the boom, Mr. Speaker, sir. And Honourable Gary Tambo should know our economy is not in the ICU, as I mentioned. Our unemployment rate is the lowest in 20 years at 4.5%, Mr. Speaker, sir. But the opposition want to debunk this. The opposition talks about foreign reserves as if we are in crisis. The reality, Mr. Speaker, sir, is that our foreign reserve sits at a comfortable level of $2 billion over 4 months in the import cover. They forgot to mention that after the political coup of '87, foreign reserves fell to a low $189 million, equivalent to less than 2 months of imports at a very smaller economy at that point in time. Neither do they want to talk about the 3 devaluations, 2 in '87 and 1 in 1998, due to the direct actions of the leader of opposition. The Fijian dollar lost half of its value due to his direct actions, and yet he talks about financial stability. Opposition members like Honourable Tambuya and Honourable Niko Noikula talk about liquidity being low, but never talk about the below $10 million liquidity during Honourable Leader of Opposition's time as Prime Minister, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, on the issue of government debt, it's very unfortunate the issue about government debt is always politicized by the opposition without any objective assessment. The Leader of Opposition and other members, as always, repeatedly make reference to nominal debt values to create fear amongst Fijians and other people around us, Mr. Speaker, sir, and claim that we are borrowing at unsustainable levels. But we have been managing our finances sustainably, Mr. Speaker, sir. We are borrowing only to build assets, to raise the productive capacity of the economy. But this is beyond the understanding of opposition, who simplistically look at the nominal debt stock each year. By all measures, Mr. Speaker, sir, our debt remains on a sustainable path. We are on track to put the debt to GDP ratio to around 45% in the next 3 years, lower than 53% in 2006. That's why we are consolidating fiscal policy after a rebuild program that costed us over $500 million. That's why we reduced our fiscal deficit from 4.4% in 2017-2018 to 3.4% in 2018-2019, and now to 2.7% in 2019-2020. This is a well-planned fiscal policy, Mr. Speaker, sir. Running expansionary policy during times of disaster and consolidating it in its aftermath. It's very sensible. It's logical. Mr. Speaker, sir, but what the opposition sees is cut. Honourable Noikula signaled that we should hang ourselves. That's hypocrisy, Mr. Speaker, sir, to the highest level. Mr. Speaker, sir, there are people who complain. They complained about high expenditure when we were doing rebuild after T.C. Winston, but now when we consolidate after rebuild, they don't want us to do that. They want us to spend more. Honourable Noikula says this government is not only cutting capital. Honourable Noikula says this government is not only cutting capital. Listen to this is a beauty. Honourable Noikula says this government is not only cutting capital expenditure, but also operational expenditure. Of course, Honourable Noikula. We want to curb operating spending and bring greater operational efficiency. We don't want to be like your leader, under whose leadership spending on capital expenditure was at a low of 12.3% in 1995, and 87.7% was spent on operational activities. If you run a business, Honorable Nawaikula, you would understand that your business would do well if you had less of an operating cost. Mr. Speaker, sir, we've had the best records on spending on capital expenditure, including a 33% budget allocated for investment spending in this budget. Mr. Speaker, sir, Honorable Nawaikula made blazing statements about liquidity and government's cash flow. Such baseless claims, Mr. Speaker, sir, are again economic sabotage of the highest order. They don't realize, Mr. Speaker, sir, on a serious note, that the damage they do by making such absurd claims. Claims about government not having enough money, Honorable Buli Tabu spun some vernacular saying there's not enough money, etc. We have enough money. Had we not, we would have increased taxes. Simple as that. But we didn't, Mr. Speaker, sir. We didn't increase our major tax rates. Again, I reiterate, the VAT remains at 9%. Corporate tax remains at 20%. PAYE threshold remains at $30,000. We have not cut civil service salaries. Honorable Nawaikula, please stop making foolish and uneducated statements, at least in Parliament. Mr. Speaker, sir, I plead with the opposition. Again, please don't put the economy at risk for your own political gains or showboating. Let's have an objective approach to the economy. The reality is, Mr. Speaker, sir, the Fiji First government has been given unparalleled support by both our multilateral and bilateral partners. Claim otherwise. The World Bank has given access to the IDA window, which allows the government to access funding at zero interest rates with an extended repayment term, 40 years. We have been getting overwhelming support from our traditional partners, like Australia and New Zealand. And also there has been profound interest shown by the French government through the Development Bank to fund the Nandi River Rehabilitation Program. The French Development Bank has never gone into a non-French territory. The European Investment Bank and the Indian government to advance our policy priorities, Mr. Speaker, sir. And of course now, the Australians through the AIFFP. Mr. Speaker, sir, the World Bank and ADB have also agreed to provide a policy-based loan to the tune of US $200 million to redeem the US $200 million international bond due in October 2020. We will be able to secure this funding at very concessional interest rate of just above 3%, as opposed to the market-based interest rate in the offshore market, which ranges from 6.625% to 9%. We anticipate to gain interest saving of Fijian $13 million to $15 million on an annual basis, Mr. Speaker, sir. This funding facility also demonstrates the confidence that multilateral partners have in the Fiji First government's economic management, financial management, and also how credible our reform initiatives are, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, many on the opposite side talked about the Help for Homes and the care program, which the Fiji First government provided in good faith after T.C. Winston, Josie, and Kenny, to help rebuild Fiji and help bring back the lives of ordinary Fijians to normalcy. We care for our people and always stand ready, whether in good times, bad times, or times of disaster. The Fiji First government is there for the people of Fiji. And I want every Fijian to know, Mr. Speaker, sir, that SODELPA and NFP are against these genuine efforts to help Fijians. They are saying we should not have spent on Help for Homes, home care, farm care, lease care, and other initiatives. What I was saying, Mr. Speaker, sir, in my budget address is that while we have gone far and beyond what any other government has ever done to assist our fellow Fijians, we will take appropriate measures if there is misuse and abuse. We all need to do our bit as responsible citizens. The opposition, of course, twisted government's genuine care for the people to suit their own shallow and self-centered agenda. Mr. Speaker said that's the reason why the people of Fiji has made them sit on the opposite bench and gave Fiji First, under leadership of our Prime Minister, the government. They were doomed in 2014, doomed in 2018, will be kaboomed in 2022. That is the Beni Marama boom, Mr. Speaker, sir. The 2019-2020 budget is well thought out and designed to ensure that the future of Fiji is safeguarded. We have been consistent with our economic and financial policies, contrary to the speculation from the opposition, and this is a responsible budget. We have offered attractive tax incentives to ensure that private sector investments continue to flourish. More jobs are created in empowering ordinary Fijians. We have smartly crafted our expenditure policies. We are committed to our promise of fiscal consolidation. We announced it in 2016-2017, but balancing with the need to ensure adequate funding for inclusive development. We still have free education. We are still directing funding for infrastructure development. We are still putting in lots of resources for better health and medical services, access to electricity, water, and social protection. We are bringing in greater operational efficiency, ensuring adequate returns for our investment, ensuring value for money, and cutting abuse and wastage. Mr. Speaker, sir, before I round off this very quickly, The opposition selectively talks about decline in some of the commodity-based sectors, which they themselves are directly responsible for, including the struggles we face in the sugarcane industry. After all, Honorable Nawaikula, as you know, was instrumental going around telling people not to renew leases back in the 1990s. Mr. Speaker, so the opposition members, including Honorable Kurin Rani, again brought in the racial twist to our continued support to the sugar industry.
I stand on a point of order of 81, misrepresentation. It's a misrepresentation to say that I was responsible for non-renewal of leases. Totally wrong. I'm entitled to correct. Understanding order 81.
Went wrong. No, I'm waiting for you.
Who has spoken to a question may speak again, explains of some material that has been misrepresented or misquoted. And not only that, and if I might add to that, also on second, the Honorable Minister said that I said there will be staff cuts. Totally wrong. I did not say that. I said there were budget cuts in relation to established staff and government wage cuts.
Salary cuts.
That is from,
I've already said it.
that is from the budget. And I still challenge the ministers to explain to the public what would be the implication of that to their staff. That's basically what I say.
Honourable Minister, you have the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir. The opposition members, including Honorable Kurin Rani, again brought in the racial twist to our continued support of the sugarcane industry. But the fact of the matter is, Mr. Speaker, sir, we've never seen budgetary allocations through the racial lenses. Not under the leadership of our Honourable Prime Minister. Mr. Speaker, sir, on this note, let me point out something very fundamental which the opposition is ignorant about, as they are still caught in the past. Many still think Fiji is an agricultural economy, and declines in certain agricultural products like dairy and timber means the entire economy is not doing well or doomed. This is totally incorrect, Mr. Speaker, sir. The primary sector accounts for around 10% of the economy, because other sectors have grown and dominate the Fijian economy, like construction, wholesale, retail, manufacturing, tourism, real estate, transport, ICT, and the financial sector. They, in fact, account almost 90% of our economy and 80% of our formal employment. We are not in the 1980s. We are in the 21st century Fiji, Mr. Speaker, sir, with a much more diversified economic base and many other economic sectors apart from just agriculture. And it is the responsibility of every government to ensure that we have a diversified economic base. Because if one gets hit, you can rely on the others. If two gets hit, you can rely on the others. That's what you call mitigating your risks. Mr. Speaker, sir, it is incorrect to say, for Honourable Kurin Rani to say that over 50% of those employed are in the agricultural sector, or to say that Fiji is an agriculture-dependent economy. Most of you need to update the statistical database and better understand the structure of the economy. Please try and understand this. Mr. Speaker, sir, the opposition also seems to harp about our economy being consumption-driven. But any service-driven economy like Fiji, with over 1/3 of our economy driven by tourism, will have consumption-related expenditure driving growth, Mr. Speaker, sir. There is nothing bad about this. What is bad about tourists spending more money in Fiji in accommodation, at restaurants, at sightseeing, at other amenities? They need to understand some of these fundamental issues, Mr. Speaker, sir. Mr. Speaker, sir, to conclude, let me say, this is a budget for the future of Fiji. This budget will protect our development gains, the decade of growth under the Bainimarama boom. This budget will ensure macroeconomic stability. This will ensure discipline. This budget will help the ordinary Fijians, businesses in every sector of the economy, Mr. Speaker, sir. This budget is for everyone, every segment of our economy, and every Fijian. It is for the empowerment of ordinary Fijians, for our youth, the elderly, disabled and vulnerable, for the future of this country, for stability and continuity, Mr. Speaker, sir. This budget is for businesses to flourish. We've provided a very stable environment, consistency in policies. We've kept taxes low. We'll continue to make doing business easier through the investment in ICT-enabled business process improvements. We are providing the enabling infrastructure and human resources. We want to partner with them and take Fiji forward, Mr. Speaker, sir. The opposition needs to understand the meaning of frugal spending and tightening budget. It's not austerity as such. With the assistance of the World Bank, we have undertaken a medium-term expenditure framework. We want to ensure maximum return for taxpayer funds I announced in the budget that we will be bringing various amendments to the FMA, bring to this Parliament, that the government needs to more regularly now provide the budgetary framework. It's never been done. We'll have to table it in Parliament. We have to table the economic position of government at least 20 days before elections, before writs are issued. All of this about accountability. You should be happy with that. We're creating a lot more transparency. You will go to the Ministry of Economy website and find every updated figure on the economy. Please go to that. Mr. Speaker, sir, likewise, we want to ensure allocated efficiency and value for money. We walk the talk. We don't shy away from making tough decisions with wider consideration of public interest. Of course, there's always room to improve. Once a policy is implemented, we should progressively review that, whether intended objectives are met. Accordingly, we should be ready to recalibrate. If it's not working, we are brave enough and humble enough to say, let's fix it up. We announced that we, for example, recognize some of the issues with FRCS. We announced in the budget we're going to put a committee in place to review the business processes. We announced in respect of the e-ticketing, we're going to look at that and how we need to fix it up. We've been monitoring for the past couple of years, Mr. Speaker, sir. Accordingly, Mr. Speaker, sir, you link it with the policy priorities of the government and take away any fats or sharpen the policy direction without compromising the philosophical basis of your government. And the philosophical basis of this government, Mr. Speaker, sir, is to empower ordinary Fijians through a transparent system, better accountability, better management of our finances, Mr. Speaker, sir. And we, Mr. Speaker, sir, are ready to make the tough decisions. We are ready to be creative. We've always been creative. We will continue to do that, Mr. Speaker, sir. And with those words, Mr. Speaker, sir, I commend the budget of 2019-2020. Thank you.